In this lesson, we're going to learn about the Git Remote command. As we have learned so far, you can have a local version of your repository and an online version of your repository. This is the local version of our repository here, and here on GitHub we have the online version of our repository where we can also see the changes that we have made, the files and everything. So what you can think of is we have this Git directory here, and we also have this Git directory somewhere in this GitHub project. So when you're working with Git locally, you have a term called remote, and remote refers to references that points to the online repository. When you clone a repository, you have a remote called origin, and we can see that if we type the git remote command. So we have origin, and this origin is pointing to this online repo here. How do we know? You can do git remote -v, and this is going to show you the remote URL. So if I enter this, you can see on origin we have https://github.com Dillion Megida git course demo. You can do a fetch for it, and you can do a push for it. This is the repo here. So this git remote command allows us to manage the remote connections that we have. The remote pointing to the online repository here. It could be GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever Git hosting providers. And what this means now is if I want to do git push to this repository, instead of doing git push and then typing this whole URL just to push, I don't have to do that. Since I have a remote name here that points to this URL, I can do git push origin, and maybe I want to push to the main branch, or I want to push to a staging branch, or I want to push to a different branch. Like I said, they are references, or you can even think of them as aliases, where you have the name of the remote and the URL you want to point it to. So how do you add a new connection? Well, let me remove the previous connection. You can do git remote remove origin, and that's going to remove the origin connection. So if I do git remote, you can see we don't have any remote. Here I can come to code this https, I can copy it, and then I can do git remote add, and what is the name of the connection, the alias, the reference, I can call this origin, and then I can put this here. So git remote is now going to show origin, and you don't have to use origin. Origin is a common name that is used when you are pointing to your own version of the repository. So this is the local, this is the online version. In some cases you would have to point to a different repository, and that is where you would see people use names like git remote add upstream and the URL of that repository. This usually happens when you fork a repository. I'm going to talk about forking a repository soon in this course. So you don't have to use origin, it's just a common name. So for example, I can git remote remove origin, and I can do git remote add Deeecode, and then paste this same URL. Now when I do git remote, see I have Deeecode. When I do git remote v, I have Deeecode here. So I can do git push Deeecode main, it says everything is up to date. I can also do git pull Deeecode main, everything is up to date. If I want to rename a connection, instead of having to remove the connection and add the connection, I can just do git remote rename, and I want to rename Deeecode to origin. So now when I do git remote v, I have origin. I can also still choose to add git remote add Deeecode like this. So now I have the same URL but two references. So if I do git remote v, I have Deeecode pointing to this, and I have origin pointing to this. So I can do git push Deeecode, git push origin, it doesn't matter, but I don't need two references, so I can remove Deeecode. You can also do something like git remote show origin, which is going to show you more information about that connection. So this is the fetch URL, this is the push URL, the head branch is main, the remote branch is main, which is tracked, the local ref configured for git push, main pushes to main up to date line. Don't worry about all this information for now, but with this show command you can find out more information about that connection instead of just the URL. Sometimes when you're working with Git, you have to manage more than one connection. This usually happens when you fork a repository. Again, more on that later on in this course. And the way you get to manage these remote connections is with the git remote command. You use this to add a new connection, rename a connection, remove a connection, saving those references, which makes it easier to run your git commands without having to worry about the remote URL. All you just need to worry about is the reference name, origin, upstream, Deeecode, whatever it is you want to call it.